this Zoom link call is about Edge Venture. It's a men's experiential weekend that began in the fall of 2007, and wanted to have a chance to talk about it myself, my own experience. Then I will turn things over to Mark Russell, who's one of the founders of the organization, talk about how it got started and the goals. And then we'll turn it over to some of the pastors who have been on the weekend and have been staffing the weekends, talk about the impact it's had on their lives and the lives of the men in their churches. So with that, I'll just go ahead and jump right in here. For me, I was part of a Great Commission church for several years, and around 2002, 2003, right when John Eldredge had written Wild at Heart, I began to lead our men's ministry at our church. We had a John Eldredge weekend where we went through some of his materials, and then I'm also a licensed counselor, and in working with some of the men that I was in contact with, they kept telling me, "Oh, you need to meet Mike Dixon." And so finally, I contacted him. We had breakfast. This was right after the very first Edge weekend. I think it was sometime in January of 2008, and he was challenging me to come on an Edge weekend. The next one was going to be in April, and he said, "I'll give you a pastor's discount." And so that hooked me. That hooked me.
Always.
So before I was signed up for the weekend. I invited Mark Russell to speak at our men's breakfast and just talk about Edge a little bit. And it's always tricky because we used to say it's like when you go see a good movie, you don't tell everybody the plot. You don't give them all the of what happened in the movie. You just say you just got to go. You just got to go. And so it's tricky talking to people about Edge because you don't want to give away the plot line. You want to make sure people go with an anticipation that God's going to do something in their life. And so Mark came and he talked to our men about it, and it was a little bit imposing because guys just instinctively knew that it was going to go deeper than a John Eldredge weekend. And after Mark was gone, after he was done talking, I let them know that I was signed up for the very next Edge weekend. And one of the guys later, a lot of you guys know Ron Windmiller, he said, as soon as he heard that I had signed up to go, he thought, oh no, that means all of us are going to have to go. And he went and had a great time and has served on several weekends and has become a big part of Edge Venture. But I know for me, the weekend experience was life-changing. God used it to just address some of the weaknesses that I had already identified in my life as a man. And God just used the weekend, being with other men, especially, and being challenged in different ways. God used it to just fill in some gaps in who I was as a man that have really served me well moving forward in my Christian life and in my ministry. So I'm just really grateful for Mike, who's no longer he's with the Lord now, and Mark, who had the vision to start this ministry and to do what they've done with it. And God has just brought so many great men to help come along and lead these weekends and just keep it going. It's an awesome ministry. So C1 is an organization that is there to support pastors and encourage them. And Edge Venture is one of the offerings that we have to be able to do that. And for pastors to know more about that and to take advantage of what's there for them and the men in their churches, I wanted to make sure that we get on this call and let some of you folks talk about, from your perspective, what it's meant to you and for the men at your churches. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mark Russell, who, again, one of the founders of the ministry, just to have him talk about, how did Edge come together? What uh, what was the catalyst that got you and Mike to get that going?
So my story is somewhat similar to yours, Rick. I wasn't certainly walking a very good Christian walk. My marriage wasn't what it should be, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was wrong, really. And somebody pursued me for probably up to like 6 or 7 months to go on one of these experiential weekends. So this is all before Edge. I went out of state to one of these, and my gosh, I got so much healing. I for the first time I found out what it really means to be a man of God. And my definition of what a godly man was so far off the chart, it was ridiculous. I remember my wife picking me up at the airport on the way home, and I just held onto her hand as tight as I could. And she looked over at me. She knew something changed in me. So fast forward a little more, Mike Dixon, you mentioned him already. He followed my path. He went through the same one that I did. We went to another one that's on the little more on the west side of us, and same thing. Mike just really grasped what it means to be a man of God, and was able to work out both of us were able to work out some of the issues that we had been dealing with, just not knowing that we weren't living the life the godly life that we should be. So that's pretty much it. And then the vision was just to bring that level of healing to our community. We wanted to build up our churches in our area, community, our churches, the families around us. And for the first 4 or 5 months, that's the way it looked. And then all of a sudden things started to expand. We had guys coming from out of state. Dave Bovenmeyer, I think you were one of the first ones to come from Iowa. And they sent a bunch of men to us. And then they asked, well, how about if you bring your key staff people to Iowa and have one there? And it really took off since then. So now we're in 4 different states right now. Pretty much the same format of the meetings, and it's life changing. So that's pretty much how it got started.
Mark, I know you and Mike went to some of those weekends together, and some of those weekends are franchised. And I think one of them asked you guys if you wanted to franchise it and bring it to Michigan.
Yep.
Just talk about where it went from there, and what was the goal that you had in mind?
Yeah. So the initial talks were that we would be a franchise to them. They were based in Chicago at the time, and they got excited about it because they wanted to branch out, and we got excited about it because here's somebody we could bring in and help train us and teach us different things. But the more that Mike and I looked at it, it wasn't a model for us. It wasn't what we really envisioned. So we just let's just do it on our own. And actually, one of the founding fathers of that organization, who helps other organizations, I remember clearly, he just looked me straight in the eye when I was staffing one of their weekends. He said, "Why don't you just start one of your own weekends?" And I looked at him, "What, me?" and God has been able to use my brokenness to start this ministry. Both Mike and I, and that's the blessing, just to see how he's been able to use us. And I am happy that we didn't go that way, because we did do things different. We've been able to hold our costs. We have no full-time staff members, so we were able to hold our costs down. We just had to raise it recently, just like everything else around us. But not a lot, but some of the other organizations out there are charging double of what we're doing. It's because they have full-time staff. Ours are all volunteer.
Yep. Yeah. And I remember when you and Mike were talking about that particular time in the history of Edge and the formation, one of the thoughts that came across your mind was, yeah, let's do it ourselves and we can make it more Christ-centered. What kind of things did you guys do to make it more Christ-centered?
Really, the probably the biggest thing was just listening to the Holy Spirit. I think even maybe the first 2 or 3 weekends that we started, we weren't doing that as much as needed, but we really relied on the Holy Spirit to lead us, to guide us through the entire weekend. So we would We would start out our weekend in prayer. We'd go around and anoint all the buildings with oil, just to let Satan know he has no place in there. Satan gets very angry after these weekends because he knows there's a lot of ground that's taken back from
Yeah.
him. So that probably was the key, Rick, is just really inviting the Holy Spirit into everything that takes place on that weekend.
Yeah, and I know, I think it was, you talked about the summer of 2007 where you guys met several times to talk about the processes and just the things that you were going to do on the weekend. Talk us a little bit about that. Tell us about that.
That was probably one of the most rewarding times of my life. I look forward to it. It was every Tuesday night. I would meet at Mike's house and just putting all the little pieces together. We met for probably 4 months, just building. Mike and I were different personalities, and it was just a really good mix. He had different skill set than I had, and it was just a perfect blend to pull this together. So yeah, I look back, and again, that was just the most rewarding time in my life, knowing that there was going to be such, maybe I should say, not knowing that we were going to have such results from the weekends. So I never realized that we would, way out in the future, we'd have well over 2,000 men that have come through it. I think we're at 2,180 men now that have come through, and
that's fantastic.
Never even thought about that back then.
Well, you think of all the men's lives who are changed, their families, their marriages, their churches. I know one of the things that we would do is guys, at the end of the weekend, we'd say, okay, go back to your churches, report to your pastor and say, what do you want me to do? And just go serve. Just go serve.
Yeah.
But what are some of the most compelling or impactful stories you've heard? What kind of feedback have you gotten about the weekends from either the participants or their wives, or that you can think of?
Yeah, it's amazing what we do here from the wives. In fact, a lot of the wives will talk to other wives and encourage them to have their husbands attend. But there was one in particular. This was back in 2016, I believe. His first name was Rob, and he came through. He claims he's a skeptic. He was a skeptic actually when he accepted Christ, when he became a Christian, and he came with an open mind, but not expecting to have happen what took place. And actually, I have his testimony right here. I'll just read parts of it just so I make sure I get it correct. He says, Edge Venture is a Christian men's experience that equips men to have a stronger relationship with Jesus, as well as tearing down the public personification of manhood and erecting a real biblically minded man who creates legitimate relationships with God, their families, and their friends. That says a lot right there. That is a lot of what Edge is about. What it's not, he said, is it's not about theology. We're not, preaching a certain kind of doctrine. It's just it's getting real with other men and getting real with God. So, and he says in here, if you're looking for a Christian, if you're looking for a weekend that's going to have free time and playtime, no, this isn't the weekend for you. And the guys realize pretty early on, we get their attention early on at the beginning of the weekend on Friday night that this is a different weekend. They're not coming just to sing Kumbaya and do the normal things that they do. And Rob waited for 2 months after the weekend just to really let things settle in, to let the spiritual. And so what he wrote was after he had that chance to let it sit in. And the last thing he said is, so friends, get in a plane, train, car, or bus and make it to Edge. It will change your perspective on so many things. Edge is something that you can only truly understand experientially. Very similar to what you said, Rick, is someone cannot tell you information on Edge. They have to reach out and they have to lead it. So one of our phrases that we use on an Edge weekend is you have to feel it to heal it. And that's what happens on these weekends. Men do go deeper. They understand where some of the roots of these issues are, and that's what I hear time and time again from the members. That they had this issue, they didn't know what it was about. It could have been just something holding them back. And I'll state, you don't even have to have a specific issue to attend Edge. you're gonna gain a lot. But if there is something that's holding them back from whatever that might be, this is the weekend where they're going to really expose what some of those deep roots are.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and thank you for just all the work that you put into getting this weekend going. And I mean, I was there in those early days and seeing
You're on number 2, second
things.
one.
Yeah, I was on number 2. Things getting worked out. I staffed several weekends. I was on the board for a few years, and I saw God just bring in multi-talented people to help with the administration of the weekend, and just see it get refined over time to what it is now. But what I want to do now is turn over to some of the pastors who are staffing or have attended the weekends, and just hear about their experiences. I just talked to a pastor who went on this past weekend, who said one of the best things about it, the weekend, was, first of all, men come into the weekend and you can't talk about what you do for a living. So he went in, nobody knew he was a pastor. Maybe a few people did who knew him personally. But he said being with other men from different walks of life and being able to leave his pastor hat at home was a really good thing for him, really good experience for him. So let's go to Dave Bovemeyer first. Dave, just talk about what impact the Edge Weekend has had on you.
Yeah, it's definitely been the most impactful men's weekend that I've ever been to by far. And this is my 15th weekend that I've been involved with. And each one has really made a difference in my own personal growth. It just seems like God draws something out, not only in the first weekend, but every time I staff, I really get blessed by it. There's just such an authenticity, an openness, and God, you've got a whole weekend just to let God work in your heart, as well as see what he's doing in other men's hearts, which often will speak to your own heart. Just helping me dig into my own heart motivations and to find areas that I need repentance and wisdom and hope to move forward. And I brought 4 of my sons to Edge, and each one has really tremendously helped them in their life in different ways. Some really fantastic, life-changing. One of my sons, he's staffed with me multiple times, and another son has staffed with me as well. So it's really bonded our family together. Sometimes there's hurts in your family that you don't intend to do as a father, and maybe you didn't even know that you were doing that. But that kind of thing has come out, and there's been able to be healing and just family bonding as we uncover those hurts and bring them out in the open for them to be healed. So it's been really helpful in my family as well as my personal life.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, that sounds really good. That's really neat. I know a couple of my sons went through it as well when I was staffing. I want to turn to Bill Cowell, who is kind of on staff with Edge as, I would say, a chaplain. And I imagine you do a lot of follow-up with men who've been on the weekend. But I want you to first just talk about, for you personally, what the Edge Weekend has done for you.
Well, it's changed my life. I mean, there's no question about it. My first weekend, I think I went through Edge 3, so it was one after you did, Rick. Actually, you were the guy that invited me to come, and I asked you about the weekend, and you said, "You trust me?" Yeah, I think so. That's all you said. And so I did trust you, and it literally changed my life. I found myself with about 30 other men, including myself, who ended up working through some of the darkest experiences of our lives. But I had the support of some other guys around me. And it was tough. It was hard work, but then they looked me in the eye and they blessed me. I felt seen. I felt heard. I didn't feel rejected at all. And my world then changed that weekend from black and white to color. I understood the place emotion takes in our hearts, because as men, we're taught that emotion, it has no place in our lives. We need to be about the business and just the facts. And it was a place of grace and non-judgment like I'd never seen. In fact, many guys have asked me over the years, they say, "Bill, why can't church be like this?
Huh.
And honestly, I don't have an answer for them, except to say that when we choose vulnerability over shame, the grace of God becomes overwhelmingly evident. And my life has been changed forever because of what God did there on that Edge weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have to agree. The grace, the mercy that is displayed on that weekend is incredible, and just creates an environment for guys to open up like they've never done before. And there's just a lot of freedom that comes as a result. So
I think most of us are looking for that kind of relationship,
yeah,
but we don't know where to find it.
right.
And Edge has structured itself to where 30 men who don't know each other can go very deep very quickly and develop some bonds that some have lasted for the last 15 years. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. Next, Tim Borseth, tell us your story. What impact has Edge had on you as a pastor?
All right. Yeah, well, yeah, Tim Borseth, Edge 32, I believe is what I was on.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's just an aspect, guys. Edge Venture creates a brotherhood that has a common experience and a common language that really bonds men together. And so it can go beyond the Edge weekend in a very powerful way, especially when a number of men at your church have participated. So then they know what you're talking about when you say checking in. They know what you're talking about when you bring up various elements and aspects of your carpet time or whatever. They know what you're talking about. They've been there. There's just a bonding that happens, and it far outlasts the Edge weekend, and that makes it so much more than let's say a conference. In a conference, yeah, you hear the same teachings, you go to the same meals and stuff like that, but this, you wrestled together, you fought together, you experienced a win, a victory together, and it's phenomenal. When I went because I had two men that I knew needed deeper healing and help than what I could provide. We've been trying the standard, apply a verse to the lie, and it just wasn't sticking. It wasn't working. And so Dave Bovenmeyer said, you need to get yourself to Edge. He was going after me. I was going after them because I was fine.
Yeah, the Christian four-letter word. I'm fine.
I didn't have any idea that I had a problem. And so when people would, they'd call me before Edge and ask these questions, I just like, well, I'm sure there's something. Oh gosh, was there ever something? Because Edge has a way of triggering a man, and all of a sudden you start feeling things that you have suppressed. They have these processes, and it brings things up, it brings things up, it brings things up, and it's like by the time you get to the pinnacle of the weekend, you're ready to hurt somebody. and yet it's clear in your mind that the problem is not other people. The problem is inside. And so I experienced a win that I didn't know I needed to fight. I didn't know that there was a thing there, and all of a sudden it just came up, it came out, it got dealt with. I experienced a real a victory. What I like about Edge is that you take biblical truths and you match it with a very powerful emotional experience, and that combination, it's like baking soda and vinegar. It just is effervescent, and it takes off this reaction. And so when you apply this very emotional experience with the truth, it changes a man. It helps you realize that you can be victorious over these wounds, these issues, these giants in your life. There is victory. It can be had. You don't have to be a victim to it or a slave to it your entire life. And it just emboldens a man to get out there and to fight and to get a win.
Thanks, Tim. Those are
Yeah.
exciting stories. Yeah,
It's
you
great
make
stuff.
it sound, it makes me think of the Band of Brothers. Remember that series that was out some
Yep.
years ago?
Yeah.
Through the warfare that they go through, the brotherhood that's created. You're describing a very similar kind of situation. And
It's
I would
great
tend
for
to,
our church.
yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So yeah, Tim, you kind of already answered my second question. I'm kind of wondering from Bill and Dave, what kind of things have you seen in your churches with the men who have come to Edge, and how has it helped you as a pastor?
Dave, I'll defer to you first.
Yeah, I just we've had over 40 men from our church go to Edge, and some of them it's been a bigger impact than others. But I think most everyone, just maybe one or two didn't like it, but almost everyone was really positive about it. And right now I'm coaching 6 small groups with shepherding a total of 120 people, about half of them adults, half of them kids. And all of my small group leaders have been to Edge. And that vulnerability and openness and getting down to the roots of things, it's really infiltrated into most of these groups. Some are still working on it, but it's really made a tremendous difference. And people, they're really dealing with the stuff in their lives in our small groups in a very significant way, deeper than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've really made it kind of like Tim. It's one of my primary, or at least initial, discipleship tools with men, just to get them there, and to introduce them to that culture that's there in Edge. It's not only helped the men in these groups, though, the women have also adopted that same kind of openness with each other. So that's one thing that's been really good. Just drawing deep things out of the heart, a rawness and openness and honesty, helping people have better self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like in our efforts to disciple people, we try to teach them concepts that they can, put into their lives. But you go away to an Edge weekend and you experience some of these things. You get a taste for that vulnerability and that bonding that takes place, and you bring it back to your church, and you have a place to keep it going. It sounds like you've done that at your church there in Iowa.
Yeah, I do think that we sometimes don't realize the impact of modeling.
Yeah.
Just way more powerful than we think, and way more necessary than we think.
Right.
You can tell someone something, but you show it.
Yep.
And that's, I think, what Edge does in this area.
Yeah. Very good. How about you, Bill?
Well, after 35 years of Sunday morning ministry, I know that most people are not always who they appear to be on Sunday morning. In reality, guys, our churches are full of broken, hurting, helpless men who continue just to live into that mask that's been offered to them. And in doing so, and I was one of those guys for a long time, I chose attachment to many of those around me over vulnerability with God and a handful of other men. I learned to live on the surface and really ignore what was going down deep inside. And for whatever reason, the church just is not turning out to be a safe place for a man to let down his guard and be honest about his pain. We've probably had 30 guys from the St. Louis area go through, and I'm currently leading an Edge group, which continues the work of what they began at Edge. We had 12 guys show up last Tuesday, and 2 are missing. We're meeting every week. These guys are doing the hard, deeper work. Heart work is hard work. And that's why so few men do it. But for those who are willing, this is a great place to become the man that God really created you to be, to get rid of the lies and the junk that holds you back from becoming the man God desires us to be. We had, I think I had 5 of our 5 male youth leaders go through this, and man, they were on the same page. They were going deep with the kids. The kids were just exploding in growth because of the level of intimacy of the leadership and the understanding of what it means to deal with life on a heart level, not just to have fun. It made a huge difference with the kids. Matter of fact, one of these guys came through 2014, I think was his Edge weekend. And when I met him, the guy was just shut down. He had no emotion whatsoever. And after going through Edge, it kind of cracked open his emotional heart here, and he tried to figure out what was going on. And he continued to do his work. And since then, he has not only led the youth ministry there at the church, stepped out of that, and he's working for something called Breakdown St. Louis, which is a ministry to all the churches in the St. Louis, all the high schools in the St. Louis area, bringing hope and help to those who are just stuck. And I'm mentoring him once a week, and we've been doing that for a long time, and his life has just bloomed. And every time I talk to him, he says it goes back to that first weekend at Edge.
Mhm.
It's what I needed and didn't have. It's what I wanted all along. And so it does make a difference in the church. As a matter of fact, and this is kind of something on the side note, if I had any daughters, I probably wouldn't let him marry a man until he went through Edge. I've told a lot of guys that. But going through Edge will really help a man know what he's dealing with and see if he's willing to pursue his work or not.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anybody else have any testimonials, any stories of just the impact you see the Edge Weekend having on the men that you know?
I think it'd be good to hear from both Jeff and Keith to hear what's going on in their churches, or
Jeff's-
on the board as well. Jonathan
Right.
LeBar, who's
Yeah.
on the tiles. Let's go to Keith first, and then maybe Jeff will.
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
Hello, everyone. The key is for us. Our pastor went through. He's not able to join this, but he went through and had said very clearly, if I had not been through Edge 3 years ago, I would not be a pastor today.
Wow.
It helped him break through some of the lies in his life and some of the burdens he was carrying as a pastor. He was finally able to just lay those at the cross, and it rejuvenated him completely spiritually.
Mm.
So incredibly powerful. And he stands up, invites men. He has me stand up regularly in service, so if anyone man wants to go and they have authentic relationship with the Lord, please go see Keith and please go through Edge. So he clearly promotes it on a monthly basis.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
add on to what Keith just said is just a little bit of history. Mike tried to put an edgy type men's retreat for his church, which Keith's pastor was. He was the pastor of that church at the time, and I'll just say it didn't go well. It didn't go well because Keith's pastor didn't know really what was coming, and he was kind of blindsided, and ended up being kind of a negative experience for him. And he didn't want to hear anything about Edge. He was totally turned off with Edge. Didn't want to have anything to do with it. Fast forward about, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years, Keith, I get a call from one of the members from his church, one of the men's leader that had stuck with him for quite a while. And the first thing he said to me is, "Mark, are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yeah." And that usually means what? Bad news.
Yeah.
And so he says, Pastor, can I say his name, Keith? It's all right, isn't it? Pastor Dan is going to come to Edge. And I'm like, no way. After all those years. And he said, yes, he is planning to come to Edge. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't get my arms, because he was so negative on it. And just like Keith said, it couldn't have been a better outcome for him. He has come and staffed on our weekends at least, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, something like that. And it was life-changing for him.
Yeah.
So my
absolutely.
motto, never say never. God can do some pretty awesome things out there.
That's right.
There was a guy on this last weekend that had been sexually abused when he was young. He felt free for the first time in his life
Mm.
because he felt like he'd been dealt with it. And the tears were running down, the smile, he couldn't wipe it off his face. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Another thing this weekend, I've led half a dozen men, or we have together half a dozen men to Christ on the weekend, because guys will invite their dad or their sons, that maybe don't know the Lord. And just yesterday morning, two of the guys that were in our small group there at Edge gave their lives to Christ. So that was really, really a blessed thing.
Mhm.
My,
Amen.
my own father accepted Christ on his Edge weekend. I asked him to go and go and go. And finally, his wife said, Frank, you don't have a choice. You're going. And he accepted Christ on the weekend. Jeff, the other board member that's with us, he was in his group, and I think Jeff was able to lead him.
Wow.
So pretty powerful. There's one other point I'd like to make that hasn't been said yet, that I think it's a really important. We see Christ in four key areas, as a man, as a priest, as a lover, as a warrior, and as a king. And Edge really works to help men see that as well. And actually, that was a big part of my experience. I was a warrior because I was protecting myself from the lies that I was believing, that God was rejecting me because my dad rejected me. Well, since the work that's happened and my heart's been freed and opened, God is making me more of that priest and more of that lover and more of that king that Christ did in perfection. So I think that's just another area that's really important that people understand.
I was on Edge too with Keith, so and I've seen his
Yep.
life over the years, and I can attest to what he just said.
So the name of your church is what?
Actually,
Jeff?
I go to Connection Church. You know, one thing we haven't mentioned that I think is really something worth mentioning is we have a lot of kids, young men, I don't want to say kids, young men, who are growing up with either they're a divorced family or there is no father. And I think most of us can attest that we find these young men just need encouragement and someone to come alongside them. Yeah. And tell them when they're that they need to make changes, serious changes in their life in order to be the men that they want to be and that the Lord wants them to be. And that's something that I think is one of our biggest issues today in churches. I don't think we have enough examples of men who are, I think all churches these days are, you know, it's the old saying, 10% of the people do 90% of the work. And I think we've got I think women are more involved in churches than their husbands are sometimes. And I think that is really unfortunate. So last year, our pastor, one of our, he's actually our music pastor now. He wasn't at the time, but he's now. Several men from my church came on in Edge Weekend last year. I think there was 5 or 6 of them. And we've had 5 or 6 more since then. But what I wanted to tell you, which I think is a beautiful story, is our now music pastor, they had a leadership getaway with all the pastors of our church. There's a process that we do on a weekend. It's called a God letter. It's a very intimate moment for a lot of men. And he decided to share that with the entire staff at this retreat that they went through for all of our church leaders. So, you know, there's so many impacts that happen that we don't even really realize. And my church is an advocate for Edge. We now have meetings, it just helps to bring men together. Somebody here already said the Christian F word is fine. If I said that, if I walked into church to one of my Edge guys at church and said I was fine, they'd probably knock me over the head. Like, I don't want to hear about you're fine. If there's really something going on, and you need to let me know or let us know. So that's what it's all about. It's about relationships. And that's what we try to do. This ministry, as everyone has already said, has changed. It's changed my life. I wouldn't be here. I can't believe that God has taken me from a place in 15 or 16 years from where I was to where I am now. So that's really all I unless there's any other questions. I don't want to keep inundating you with, I could go over story and story and story. There were 2 brothers this last weekend. One's 25, one's 26, both very tough guys, big build guys. And, you know, they were all rough, but yet when they got together, their eyes were watering, and they they hugged each other and they loved on each other. And it's a beautiful experience to watch those things happen.
Mhm. Thank you, Jeff. Okay. I know I posed this last question is, what would you say to any man about why he should attend an Edge weekend? Maybe tailor that towards pastors. What would you say to any pastor who's thinking about coming themselves, or maybe sending men from their church to an Edge weekend? What would you say to them?
There's two things here. One of them is good. One of them is bad. Not bad, but I think in the past, pastors have thought that we're trying to pull their men from their churches. I think there's I hope I can be frank on this call. This is a time
They
for us
feel,
all
you
to
say, I think you're saying they feel threatened.
Yes, absolutely. However, the advantage to building a relationship with men on a more intimate level, all it does is bring the strength together. So when we know there's something going on in a family situation, or if we know that their wife has talked to my wife and we know that there's trouble in the marriage, we can come up to the guy and say, hey, what's going on? Nothing. Well, that's not true. There is something going on. And when you have that kind of intimate relationship, you're allowed to do that. And you can do that because you do it with love and in concern. We're not coming against men. We are trying to come alongside them. So I think that having a group of men from a church come on a weekend is an incredible benefit because it brings those men closer together. And I don't think we have a lot of that going on in our churches today.
So basically you're saying for pastors, don't feel threatened. Don't be
No.
afraid.
Mhm.
Jump in and see the benefits.
Absolutely. We're trying to build leadership. And when we are vulnerable with one another as men, all it does is make us stronger. I mean, it's not a weakness. It's to me, it's a weakness to be burying ourselves in our job or just not doing anything about issues in our life. But it helps us to be better husbands and followers of Christ. And it just helps you to understand that it's okay to have emotion. I mean, we don't walk around crying all day long, obviously, but when guys leave, they're like, my gosh, I haven't cried in 5 years. Well, maybe you need to cry. Maybe you need to cry about something. Maybe there's something you've tried to handle on your own. When my daughter was going through cancer several years ago, I was an absolute wreck. I didn't want to talk to anybody about it because I didn't know what to do, how to handle it. But going on an Edge weekend and having other men cry with me at what I was going through was life-changing. And I've done that with many men since then. Cancer or death, whatever it may be, it's just being able to build a great relationship.
I think everything you're saying is true, Jeff. I really think that life goes from black and white to color once you understand that emotion is God-given. And God is wanting to tell you some things through your emotions. My wife is wanting to know what's going on in here. Our call is to live from the heart. But if my heart is disconnected, what do I have to give? We can't fall in love with a mask. My wife told me that years ago. You can't fall in love with a mask. Who are you behind that mask? This is the place where you take the mask down, where I can find out who I am and allow God then to begin doing the true work of the heart, which really the fruit is going to go out everywhere. It's going to go out to my work, to my family, to my church. It's going to ooze out everywhere. Once God begins doing that deep work on my heart, he changes who I am. And the result is what Jesus calls fruit. Dave?
I know the first time I staffed, they were doing a process where a young man had just a tremendous wound. I think it was a mother wound, if I remember right, and he just could never please his parents. I think his dad was gone, and he was just working through they did this in front of about 60 men, and he was working through the lies that he believed about himself. And he was so angry, and he was And through the process, he was able to express his anger, and then he just broke down weeping and sobbing. And I looked around, and every man in the room, 60 men, they were all weeping, including me, because we could identify with that young man so closely. And so I think that when I heard that, I thought, I've got to get my boys here.
Hmm.
And I've got to start bringing people to this. And the power of it is just amazing. So I guess I just say that men, we have hurts, we have habits, we have hang-ups, we have wounding just as much as women do. I mean, but most men, they don't want to go for 6 months for counseling or whatever. They don't want to spend the money, they don't have the time. And I think this is a way to introduce them where they can actually get sometimes a lot done in one weekend, and at least open up their hearts to start that process of finding God's love deeper in the heart. That's what I think that heart work is. It's really bringing the love of God deeper inside, that we might comprehend the height and the depth and the length and the breadth of the love of God that surpasses knowledge. It's not easy to do that. And this kind of opens up your heart so that can happen better.
I don't know that this has actually been mentioned before in these words, but the Edge Weekend is an experiential weekend. There's no talking head. We don't pull out notebooks and have sessions. We're on our feet. We're working ourselves through processes. And this is part of what identifies that from almost every other type of weekend that I've ever been to. I've been to a ton of conferences and training seminars, but this is experiential, and men tend to learn by doing, not just by hearing something and writing it down in a notebook. And this has made all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
It's not physical challenges like rope climbing and that kind of thing, but it's more of a heart challenge. So.
Yep.
And one of
Okay.
Bill's famous saying is the longest distance a man has to travel is what? 18 inches from his head to your heart.
You got it.
That's our saying at Edge. Not head knowledge, it's heart knowledge.
Yeah, and I would just say, to piggyback on what Dave said, as a professional counselor, if I send a guy to an Edge weekend, he can deal with something in that weekend, which spending week after week with me, an hour or two at a time, it may take several weeks to get down to something because it's so guarded. But there's something that happens on an Edge weekend that there's an environment there of vulnerability, of openness, the example that's set. And one of the things we haven't mentioned is, an Edge weekend is about 30 men, and it's staffed by another 30 men. So the ratio is very high. And the example that's set by those staffers really sets the tone for the weekend. We didn't even get into that, but it's just a tremendous weekend. I'm very grateful for Mike Dixon challenging me to come on Edge 2, and all the time that I was able to serve and staff on the weekends, and even time on the board with some of you guys was good.
I'd like to say, Rick, thank you so much for inviting me to Edge.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Jeff and Mark and Keith, and just for coming out and helping us here in Iowa. I'm just so grateful to you, men. It's been a very bonding thing for me to be with you guys. I just love you so much.
Yeah, I love Iowa too.
Yeah, I appreciate all you men, and thank you for coming on this call and just sharing your experiences and your thoughts and your heart. My prayer is that, I think of, Dave, what you described of what's happening at your church and the overseeing that you're doing with the life groups, and just the culture that's been created there because of Edge. That's phenomenal. I think that's what a lot of pastors dream of, is to have that kind of a culture. And admittedly too, there's a lot of pastors who are afraid of walking down that path. So I would challenge those men who do have the anxiety about it, the fear about it. Jump in, take a risk. It's well worth it. It's well worth it.